Hello and welcome to this video in which we take a fast look at the prologue in Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. What is a prologue? Well, that's what we're going to look at in today's video. The word prologue has a number of meanings depending on the type of text you're talking about. But in terms of a play, prologue is an introduction which explains the themes of the play and also gives away some of the plot. It's similar to a film trailer, but actually a film trailer differs in one big way because a film trailer just hints at what the film is about, whereas a prologue in Shakespeare's time actually gave away the whole plot and told you everything that was going to happen in the play, the beginning, the middle and the end. So it's actually like one of those film trailers that's really bad, that tells you way too much. Normally that's the sign of a film that's not very good. You know, the sort of, it began on a Monday. You think, oh, this is interesting. And then the man fell over. And it just tells you everything. And then you get to the end of the trailer and you think, well, there's no surprises in this film. I know everything. So the question is, why would Shakespeare, who is undoubtedly, a brilliant writer, give away all of the plot in the first 5 minutes of the play? It just doesn't seem to make sense. And I've been teaching a number of years and I've heard lots of different ideas about why it could be. But I think there are a few main points that we'll have a little look at. The first thing to get your head around is that the Elizabethan theatre was not like the theatre we have today, where it's very quiet and well behaved and people go in and quietly shuffle along to their seats and check their tickets and sit and with their little pot of £4 ice cream and enjoy the play. The theatre in Elizabethan times was very different, and I'll come to what it looked like in a second. So if we're dealing with a totally different historical period, hundreds and hundreds of years ago, in a theatre that actually looked very different and operated very differently, that might help us to understand why a play would do something that seems so odd to us today. Because this is a little glimpse of what the Elizabethan theatre was like. There'd be between 1,500 and 3,000 people in attendance. That's a lot of people. Bearing in mind they didn't have microphones or speakers. It was all the projection of their voice and the acoustics of the building. Food and drink would be sold. There would be a mixture of rich and poor people in attendance. The poor people for a penny could go and sort of right near the front of the stage in an open air section and stand and watch the play there. The rich people would have better seats. The poor people at the front were known as groundlings, and they were a riotous lot who'd kick off if they didn't like the play. So one of the good things that we can say about the prologue is that the prologue would have to convince them that something in the play would interest them. So in Romeo and Juliet, the prologue basically tells us, this is about love, but it's also about murder, and it's also got excitement. The prologue really had to be, performed to try and convince everyone to, right, shut up now, we're about to begin, and this is what you're going to see, so it's going to be in your best interests to shush, because it wouldn't be, the same kind of, reverential hush that you find today. Another thing, though, that you need to understand is there were no actresses in Shakespeare's time. It was all men who played the roles, so Juliet would have been played by a man. There were no real costumes that the actors wore. They would have their own costume, but they wouldn't put on specific, well-produced costumes like we see today in period dramas and Lord of the Rings and that kind of thing. These really well-embroidered kind of historical sort of metaphorical costumes that are really impressive. There wouldn't be anything like that, and there wouldn't be any set changes, so the set would be quite limited and it wouldn't change. It's not like things in a more modern theatre like a new background and new kind of scenery and props and everything. So it was actually quite limited what people saw. And I think that also gives us an insight into the job of the prologue, because the prologue tells us, this story takes place in Verona and this happens and this happens. And I think it would help the audience as they were watching the play, because they know from the prologue where it's taking place and what's happening. It would be a bit ridiculous if, Shakespeare had to make it all so obvious that, Romeo was walking along and saying, "Oh, I really love it here in Verona, isn't it a nice hot day?" So the prologue gets that bit out of the way.